Hi viewers, this is Salahuddin with lecture number 11. In the previous lecture, we talked about the Hanoverian succession, constitutional and political developments that took place in the succession of Hanoverian. Today we will talk about growth of political parties in England, how the political parties grow with the passage of time in England. Uh, First and foremost, we must understand meaning of the political parties. What is the meaning of the political parties? So when some people associate themselves for the will and welfare of the country under influence of certain political ideas and policies, they constitute a political party. They constitute a political party when they have certain policies and political ideas under through which they can take care of the will and welfare of the people. Uh, there were two fundamental principles in the party system has two fundamental principles. Number first, the ministers should belong to the majority party. The minister should belong to the majority of the House of Common. Those who are majority in the House of Common. One is the House of Common, and the other is the House of Lord. So they can constitute a party, political government where they are in majority in the House of Common. And the second important is there should be a powerful opposition to keep the leader of the ruling party active and honest. There should be powerful opposition on the other hand. So these were two principles by the political system or political to administer a government. This is the meaning of the political parties, right? And now we will talk about how the political parties in England, the origin of the political parties in England, the second and most important aspect of the question. In the 15th century, there were two parties in England. In the 15th century, there were two parties in England. Uh, One is called the Yorkists and the other is called the Lancastrians. However, uh, these two parties were theirs, and these were kind of groups, not is now is they are today in the modern time is they are political parties. Earlier, they were just two groups. Groups in having when people having collective interest and they would form a group. And similarly, at that time in the 14th century, these groups were have collective interest and were fighting against each other. But later on in the 17th century, we find three groups. And those groups are, of course, religious groups. They were the Anglican, they were the Puritans, and the Catholics. These three groups were found in the 17th century. And they were different ideologically. They were different. Both all these three groups were different ideologically. However, the origin of the political system in England took place in the 1640. Proper development or proper origin of the political system took place in the 1640. How? Uh, Between 1640 and 42, the parliament was bitterly divided into two hostile groups. One favored the King Charles I, who was ruling at that time, Charles I. And Charles I, of course, ruled till uh, his execution in 1648 when he was executed and Cromwell was brought to the throne of England. This was also a kind of revolution where should took place. Uh, yes, in 1640 to 42, 1640 to 42, the parliament was bitterly divided into two groups. One was favoring the King Charles I, and those were known as the Royalists, and later on they were called the Tories, are the Cavaliers. At that time, there were two names for this same group. For the Tories, they were Royalists because they were royal to the king, and the Cavaliers. The other group which supported the right of the parliament was called the Roundheads, and how the Roundheads were later on called the Whigs. The political parties actually originated, and and then proper political parties, they were just constituted at that time, and then where their influence was exerted, and people accepted that they are political parties having mottos, having policies, having a system. And that took place in 1679, when during the reign of Charles II. Uh, that was the time Charles II was ruling after Cromwell in 53. Cromwell ruled for 5 years, and after that, Charles II came to the throne. And uh, when Charles II came to the throne uh, in uh, in 53, uh, in the time of Charles II, uh, the exclusion bill was put forth, and the bill was about the exclusion of the James II, his brother of Charles II. And the exclusion bill was saying that James II should not come on the throne of England. Uh, the Whig, who were called Roundheads, they were they were supporting this bill, and they were in favor that James II should not come on the throne of England. While on the other hand, uh, the Cavalier or the Royalists, they were favoring James II, and of course they were in favor of the right of the divine right of kingship. Thus, these two hostile groups calling each other different name as well, and those nicknames whom they were calling each other, to the Whig they would call the petitioners, right? That who sue the bill in the Parliament of the exclusion of James II, and they were called the Whig later on. And those round heads were later on called the Whig, while those Cavalier or the Royalist were in the same time called the Tory. What is the meaning of these two names? Whig, these were nicknames, and Whigs mean the Wayface are the rebels. The Whigs mean Wayface are the rebels, and the Tory means the highwaymen are the Dacoits. So, thus the origin of the political parties in England. We talked about the origin, how it took place, and how proper the development and origin took place. And yes, the 1642 date is very important. Charles I, and then the Charles II tenure, where the bill of exclusion was put forth to him, and those who were supporting the exclusion bill was called the Whig, or the are Roundheads, and those who were in favor of the James II, they were called Tory. And before This they were called the Cavalier or Royalist. And what were the programs and policies of the Whig and Tories? We will also talk about their programs and policies. They had great differences, both because they were different politically and religiously, and every aspect they were different. So, the principle and policies of the Whigs had been explained by Locke in his treatise in his treatise on civil government. Locke defined those policies of the Whig, while those of the Tories have been described by the Filmer in Patriarcha and by Hobbes and Leviathan. So the intelligentsia of that time also started supporting party of their own interest, and people from various strata also started taking interest in the political parties, and each of them were started and supported by different people. Thus, the difference can be studied under various uh, heads, right? How their difference can be studied, but we can, yes, we can study the difference under various heads like the religious, social, political, and economic, even and porn. First, we are going to talk about the religious differences. What were the religious differences of the Whig and the Tory? We talked in detail. These lectures, these are the start, and this is pure history. So if you want to grab the history, you must watch the previous lectures because they are very much related with each other. And what we are talking now is related with the previous lecture. And you cannot find or grasp the idea that we are talking right now if you haven't watched the previous lecture, because these are very much related, and in proper order we are going on. Yes, the differences we are talking about between the Tories and the Whig. So first there was religious differences, as we talked in the previous lecture that the Tories they were conservative, and uh, they could not favor the policy of laxity or to be lenient with dissenters, while on the other hand, the Whigs they were more tolerant and giving more and giving more space to various religious groups in this regard. Thus, they wanted, both of them have their own religious ideologies uh, regarding the people. The Tories they believe in the Anglican Church, and they did not favor any emancipation to other faiths, right? So this is the first difference, religious difference. Second is the constitutional difference. Constitutional difference. The Whig Party believed in the rule of law and wanted to establish a constitutional government, but the Tory party believe in the divine right of kings. Uh, the Whig wanted to exclude James II from the succession to the throne of England, while Tories did not approve such act. Constitutionally, they were also different. Yes, in the previous lecture, in the origin of the political parties, as we talked, that the bill of exclusion against James II was put forth by the Whigs, and while the Tories they were against this bill. Secondly, the Whig believed in the law of in the rule of law, while the Tories they were believed in the divine right of kings. Second, social and economic differences. They had also social and economic differences. The Whig Party was in favor of reforms and against the will of the king, right? While the Tories party were not willing to go against the wish of the king. The Whig, they were mostly commercial and they were commercial class and they wanted to establish pre-trade policy. And while on the other hand, Tories, they were landlord and were interested in upkeeping the interest of the landlord. Uh, thus, they had social and economic difference in this sense. Uh, the one party, the Whig, uh, they were industrialist and they were a commercial class, right? And second, the will of the king was of prime importance for the Tories, while the rule of law was of prime importance for the Whigs. Now coming to the differences in foreign policy. What differences they had in the foreign policy? The Whig wanted to enter the European politics, but the Tories did not favor this idea at all. The Whig was fully supported by the traders and moneylenders, citizens, and the dissenters because they were tolerant. On the other hand, the Tory party was supported by the rural people, follower of the Anglican Church and the conservatives. And the Whig, they were also favor of the strong foreign policy. Even they were also in favor of the wars, while the Tories, they were against the wars, as we discussed in the previous lecture in the War of Spanish Succession. So, how the growth of political parties, these were differences, primarily these were differences. Now, coming to the very important part of the question is the growth of the political parties. Growth during the reign of James II, we will start the discussion from the James II. Yes, the Whig opposed the succession of the James II and favored the succession of Duke of Monmouth. So James II was bitterly opposed to the Whig and favored the Tories. When the king started favoring Catholics, yes, at last both the parties uh, giantly revolted against the James II uh, when he started favoring the Catholics. And this was, as we discussed in the Glorious Revolution, the important reason that that James II was converting people from other faiths to Catholicism. When this policy was adopted by James II, he was bitterly opposed by both the parties, the Tory and the Whig, and thus the James II had help in the exclusion of the James II. Uh, right, and the glorious revolution took place. Yes, in the reign of James II, the two parties had different ideas and they had support either in one sense or another, but still they had a distinctive features from each others. This is the initial stages. Now the growth of the parties are taking place, and then comes the William III. Yes, when William III came to the throne of England as a result of glorious revolution in 1689, uh, the Tories, they were not in favor of the William III, while the Whig, they were highly in favor of William III. Thus, when William III came to the throne and the Bill of rights and the Act of Settlement in 1701 when it was signed by William III. Uh, William could not. He took ministers from both the parties, from the Whig and ministers, but these two parties they were highly polarized and distinctive from each other in the social, political, and economic and religious aspects. So thus the running administration power William III become very difficult. Uh, Therefore, William III in 1694 took ministers from the single party because it was the favorite party of the William III. Therefore, he took all ministers from the Whig ministry, which proved very fruitful in running the administration of the country. While some bitterness was also aroused toward the Tory party, thus, this polarization again developed there, and they kept segregated the Tory party due to its policies. Uh, Later on, uh, Tories were not liking the war policy of William III against France because the France is William Louis the 14th, who was highly in favor of the stout dynasty of the James II to the throne of England. Thus, the Tory policy did not like the war policy of William III, and thus kind of bitterness arose between William III and the Tory parties and the Tory party, due to which the Tory party was was in a kind of bad books of the William III, and the Whig remain in the favorite ones. Now coming to the growth during the reign of Queen Anne, whose reign starts from 1702 to 1714. Queen Anne was also in favor of the divine rightships, while Tory was also in favor of the divine rightship kingships. Thus, both these two have some kind of coherence with each other ideologically. Uh, Tory and Queen were against the war, while the Whigs they were in favor of the war against France. With the death of Queen Anne, this greatly changed the situation. The Tory would trying to bring the Stout dynasty to the throne of England back, while this death of Queen Anne nullified all those hopes of bringing back the Stout dynasty to the throne of England, and thus the Whig become more strengthened with the coming of George Louis, who become George I coming to the throne of England in 1714. Uh, thus, the parliament also become popular. The popularity of the parliament rightly starts from here, George I's reign. Now coming to the growth during the reign of George I and George II. Proper and very distinctive developments that took place of the political parties that is from the George I period. Due to the majority of the Whig in the House of Commons, George I inclination toward the Whig also increased, and the Whig ministry was formed in 1714. Uh, as we talked about, that George I could not understand English language, he could not understand the politics of England, he could not understand the tradition, norms, and of the English people. Therefore, he could not attend the parliament and would remain absent from the parliamentary discussions. and he would hand over their discussion a person to the abiliest of the men to hold the discussion or chair the meeting of the parliament. And the person who would chair the meeting of the parliament was later on known as the prime minister. In this regard, Robert Walpole, who is also known as the first Prime Minister of England in 1721, he was the noblest of the ablest of the ministers from the House of Commons, and he would chair the meeting during the reign of Queen George I. So, thus, the ministerships also begin right from the era of the George I due to his inefficiency or due to his incompetence. The creation of the office of prime minister led to the progress in the party system of the government. Mm, Thus, this proper development of prime ministership and ministry took place in the George I's period. Uh, Later on, when George II and George III came to the throne of England, respectively, George through George III, he was a bit more um uh, dictatorial and despotic in rule. Even uh, his mother, Augusta, would call him that George tried to be a king. George to be a king. Earlier, the king was just a puppet in the hands of those ministers, but now even his mother would call him to George to be a king, and he became so dictatorial that he would go against the policies of the parliament, and he would go and he would reverse every policy of the parliament. And by that he also formed his own close group of close ministers, and that would call the king's friends, through which he would pass the bill and run the parliament, those close ministers. In George III, of course, he became dictatorial, despotic in rule. Uh, in 1832, this the party system, the Whig, the Tory, and later on the 1832, those two party until 1832 were uh, were there in England with two names, Liberal and the Conservative Party. The Liberal, the Whig were called the Liberal Party, and the Tory were called the Conservative Party. But in the 20th century, there another party also arose in England, and that is known as the Labour Party. So this is all about the development of political parties in England, and we try to make it short, but the video would, otherwise the video would get lengthy. There were some more details regarding the developments, but we are trying to make it short because it would be difficult for you people to watch it complete, because it's complete watching it complete is definitely necessary for you people. So thank you so much for watching the video. If there is any question regarding the topic, political parties, evolution of political parties in England, so definitely ask in the comment section, and I am here to answer your question. So thank you so much for watching the video.